They say that at 99, you're supposed to start forgetting. That the mind dims like a candle burned down to the last inch of wick. But for me, the past isn't some faded photograph curled at the edges. It's a wildfire that still warms my skin. If tomorrow chose not to arrive, I wouldn't carry today's headlines with me. I'd carry the scent of George's red clay in 1927. You know the kind. The kind that clings to your soul and never quite washes off, no matter how many baths you take or how many years go by. I was born into a world drawn with rulers I never chose. There was an invisible line slicing through my town. My street, sometimes it felt like it cut straight through my own heart. On one side, the world gleamed in white linen and spotless sidewalks. On my side, it was made of mud and a silence you learned to tend long before you ever learned to read. My mother, Sarah, was a small woman, but when she walked, the ground seemed to step aside. She used to tell me, "Elias, pay attention. The world will try to convince you that you are what they say you are. They'll look at your skin, your bare feet, your wooden house, and they'll sketch a destiny for you. But listen closely. The pen is in your hand, not theirs." Back then, we didn't have having. That belonged to the other side of the line. What we had was being, and being was hard work. I remember watching my father come home from the fields. The sun had already set, but the heat still rose from his body like steam. He wasn't a man of many words. Racism in those days wasn't only shouted, it lived in quiet refusals. In glances that passed through you like you were made of glass, in gates that stayed shut. I saw my father lower his eyes to men who didn't possess half his honor, just to make sure there would be bread on our table. Back then, I thought that was defeat. Now, with nearly a century on my shoulders, I understand it was the purest form of love and resilience there is. He was swallowing the world's poison so I wouldn't have to taste it too soon. At night, when the cicadas were the only music we had, my grandfather would take me outside. He had scars across his back he never explained, but I understood them by touch. He would point to the sky and say, "Look up, Elias. No one owns that. No one can hang a no trespassing sign on the stars. Up there, we are all the same size. Beneath that, Georgia sky." I learned that the idea of life ending wasn't something to fear. My grandfather used to say that when a tree falls in the forest, it makes the soil richer for the one that will grow next. If everything had ended for me back then, what would have remained? I was just a black boy in the segregated South, but inside, I had already learned that my dignity was sovereign ground. Territory no white man in a linen suit could enter without my permission. And you listening to me now, living in this century of speed and glittering things that shined but carry no weight. I'll ask you this. If your tomorrow were cancelled, would you have something within you that doesn't depend on your bank balance or the make of your car? I began my life with nothing in my pockets but a chest full of stars, and that was the first lesson I ever learned. Build what time cannot take. Because when tomorrow fails to arrive, all that remains is who you became in the dark. In 1929, a world that believed it owned time discovered it was made of paper. Stories drifted in from the big cities about men who had everything one day and nothing the next but empty pockets. They said the market had crashed. I was just a boy. To me, a market was the sack my mother carried seeds in. I couldn't understand how something like that could make the whole world weep. But the weeping reached us. It arrived in the shape of a new kind of silence. Not the silence of peace, the silence of hunger. On my side of the line, we were already masters at living with little. But the Great Depression didn't just want our little, it wanted our hope. I watched the earth dry and split open, as if the ground itself were crying for mercy. The cotton wouldn't come. Work vanished like smoke in the wind. And that's when I saw something that reshaped my understanding of being and having. I saw men who once walked with swollen pride. The same men who looked through us as if we were invisible, now sitting on the edge of the same dusty road we knew so well. Hunger, I learned, has no color. It doesn't honor fences or segregation laws. When your stomach aches, pride is the first thing you throw away just to survive. One afternoon, my mother was boiling what remained of a sack of corn. It was a thin soup, almost transparent. Through the window, I saw a white neighbor, a man who had never once spoken to us, standing by our gate. He looked like a ghost of himself. Clothes that were once pressed and proper now hung off him like rags. My mother handed me a metal cup filled with that watery soup. She looked straight into my eyes and said, "Take it to him, Elias." I froze. A boy's resentment is sharp. I remembered the times his sons had laughed at me. "But Mama," I said, "he doesn't even like us." She knelt down so we were eye to eye and placed her hand over my heart. "Elias, if you feed only those who love you, you're making a transaction. If you feed someone who's given you nothing, you're practicing your humanity. The world out there may be collapsing, but inside this house, we will not let our souls fall with the banks." I carried the soup to him. His hands trembled as he took the cup. There was no spoken thank you, just a small nod and a look that said, "I am human too." In that moment, I understood, real wealth isn't what you accumulate when everything is going well. It's what remains of you when everything has been stripped away. If the world had ended on that day in 1930, what would have survived of us? That gesture would have. The dignity of generosity and scarcity would have. You live now in a world where people fight over excess. You grieve when the signal drops, or when your coffee isn't the perfect temperature. I lived through a time when survival itself was a daily prayer. And strangely enough, we were more present with one another. Scarcity doesn't build character, it reveals it. I learned how to be rich when I didn't have a single cent to my name. And that kind of wealth, my friend, is the only kind death cannot confiscate. Time has a curious way of pushing us straight into the fire. In 1942, the world was burning. And suddenly, the same country that wouldn't let me sit at the front of a bus needed me to carry a rifle. Uncle Sam pointed his finger at me, and for the first time in my life, I felt my existence had official value. But it was value with a bitter price. Putting on that uniform felt like stepping into a skin that wasn't entirely mine. On the outside, I was a United States soldier. On the inside, I was still Elias, the boy who couldn't walk through the front doors of restaurants back in Georgia. We were sent to segregated training camps. We learned how to die for freedom in separate barracks, ate at separate tables, and dreamed in languages that barely seemed to touch. The irony was so sharp, you could taste it at the back of your throat. I looked at the other black men in uniform, men from Harlem, Alabama, Detroit, and saw the same question flickering in their eyes. We're going to save the world from a tyrant. But who will save us from the tyranny waiting at home? But the ocean. The ocean doesn't recognize Jim Crow. When our ship cut across the Atlantic toward Europe, the vastness of those waters showed me something I had never fully grasped. The world was bigger than the whites-only signs. I had grown up beneath war. War is the harshest teacher there is. In the mud of France, under the deafening roar of German artillery, the color of your skin became the least relevant detail in the universe. The mud clung to everyone the same way. The cold was democratic. It froze the fingers of a boy from Ohio and a boy from Georgia with equal cruelty. I remember a white soldier wounded in a ditch beside me. He was in shock, calling out for his mother. I held his hand in the darkness of that trench. In that moment, under the threat that tomorrow might never come for either of us, all the lies we'd been told about our differences evaporated. Under fire, under the shadow of the end, there were only two human beings trying to keep each other warm. I watched men die before they had the chance to ask forgiveness from the ones they loved. I saw lives cut off mid-sentence, and that gave me a clarity no school of psychology could ever teach. Time isn't something you have. Time is a loan that can be called in at any second. When the war ended and I returned home with medals pinned to my chest, Georgia welcomed me back with the same old signs. I was a hero in Europe and a problem in my own neighborhood. But something inside me had changed forever. I no longer fit the mold the world had prepared for me. If you're listening to me now and you feel your worth depends on the approval of people who don't even see you, look at me. I fought for a country that did not love me, and it taught me that self-love was the only homeland I truly owned. Too many of us spend entire lifetimes trying to prove ourselves to people who will never recognize our humanity. Don't make that mistake. Freedom isn't a document signed by a government. It's the courage to be who you are, even when the world insists you disappear. I survived the war only to discover that the most important battle isn't against an external enemy. It's against the fear of not being enough. When I came home, I wasn't the same man. I had seen the world bleed, and I had seen it set free. I returned to Georgia, and later moved north, searching for a place where my work would be worth as much as my effort. I got married, we had a daughter, and in her eyes, my resilience found a new name: responsibility. When you're young, you fight for yourself. But when you hold a child in your arms, you begin fighting for years you may never live to see. The 1960s weren't just a decade, they were a collective awakening. The air felt electric, as if a storm were about to break and wash the world clean. In 1963, I was in Washington. I was 36 years old, my hands rough from construction work, my shoulders broad from carrying the weight of a family and a history. I remember the heat, a heat that didn't come only from the sun, but from bodies standing close together. We were thousands, a sea of faces the world had always said didn't matter. And then, he stepped up to the podium. When Dr. King began to speak, the silence that settled over that lawn was the loudest thing I had ever heard. He didn't speak of hatred, he spoke of a dream. And for those of us sitting there, that dream wasn't fantasy. It was oxygen. He spoke of a day when the color of our skin would be as irrelevant as the color of our shoes. That was when I understood the difference between having and being. That crowd had no political power, no vast fortunes, no keys to the government. But we were truth. And truth carries a weight that no lie, no matter how heavily armed, can uphold forever. But resilience comes at a high cost. In 1968, the world darkened again. I remember exactly where I was when I heard that Dr. King had been silenced in Memphis. I sat on the edge of my bed and felt a cold that not even the Georgia sun could warm. It felt as if tomorrow had been stolen from us once more. My daughter came to me and asked why I was crying. How do you explain to a child that hope has been shot down on a balcony? They killed the messenger, but the message was already running through my veins. And through hers. His death gave us a brutal lesson in priorities. If you don't have something worth dying for, you haven't truly begun to live. You who live now in a world of instant opinions and keyboard courage, do you have a dream that would survive a bullet? Do you have something that moves you beyond your own comfort? Too often, we spend our entire lives fighting over small things, over offenses time will erase in a week. I watched giants fall so that you could walk with your head held high today. Dr. King had only 39 years on this earth. I had nearly tripled that. But it isn't the length that matters, it's the depth. Don't wait for the world to become perfect before you decide to be just. Don't wait for the pain to fade before you choose to be kind. Resilience isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to march through it, knowing your steps are clearing the path for those coming behind you. Time is a patient sculptor, but sometimes it decides to run. After the storms of the 60s, the world began to change in ways my grandfather, with his stories of stars and red clay, could never have imagined. I watched a man leave the earth and walk on the moon. And suddenly the sky that once felt infinite became just another frontier. I entered my 60s, then my 70s, and I watched the world wrap itself in wires, then in invisible waves. People began carrying the knowledge of the entire universe in their pockets. But I noticed something curious. The more information they held, the less time they seemed to have to look one another in the eye. Having put on a new face, the need to have connection, to have visibility, to have urgency. I saw young people running, typing, living in a tomorrow that hadn't yet arrived. And I, with decades resting heavy on my shoulders, felt the urge to shout, "Stop. The present is the only solid ground you have." Then, in 2008, time handed me a gift I treasured like a rare jewel. I was 81 years old. I had seen almost everything, or so I thought. I stood in line to vote on a cold November day. My joints ached, the air felt heavy, but I would not have left that line even if the world had ended. When I saw the results that night, when I saw a man who looked like me, who carried the same history of resilience in his skin, step onto that stage as the leader of the nation that once sent me to the back of the bus, I understood that the arc of history is long. Yes, but it bends toward justice when enough hands are pulling it. I cried for myself. I cried for my father, who died in silence. I cried for my daughter. The impossible had just happened. But the greatest lesson wasn't in politics or technology. It was in what came after. My wife, the woman who had been my compass for more than half a century, began saying goodbye long before she left. Alzheimer's dimmed the lights inside her, one by one. That was my final test of resilience. It was no longer about marching in the streets or fighting in trenches. It was about sitting beside her, holding her hand, loving her even when she no longer knew my name. I learned that love doesn't require memory to exist. It only requires presence. It wouldn't be the photographs in the album that mattered. but the warmth of my hand in hers in that exact second. Mortality taught me that love is the only thing that grows when you give it away. Today, I see you obsessed with capturing every moment in pictures, yet forgetting to live them with your soul. You collect moments like trophies on a digital shelf. But are you allowing those moments to shape who you become? Technology has accelerated everything, except the human heart. The heart still beats at the same rhythm it did in 1927. It still needs silence, truth, and purpose. If your tomorrow were cancelled right now, what would remain of your digital trail? A string of edited images, or the real impact you had on someone's life? I have seen empires of steel crumble, and I have seen small acts of kindness endure for 100 years. Choose wisely where you invest your today, because in the end, the only technology that truly matters is the ability to remain human in a world that tries to reduce you to data. Reaching 99 is like climbing to the top of a very high mountain. The air up there is thin, your breath comes short, and your legs protest every step you've taken across the decades. But the view, the view makes every scar worthwhile. From up here, I no longer see the lines that divided the world when I was a boy. I don't see the fences, the no trespassing signs, or the borders wars tried to carve into the mud. From here, I see a vast tapestry of lives crossing paths, all searching for the same things. A little peace, a little bread, and someone to hold their hand in the dark. People often ask if I'm afraid that tomorrow might not come. I smile. Fear belongs to those who feel they postponed living. Fear belongs to those still trying to have something in order to prove they are something. I own almost nothing now. My friends have gone on ahead. My wife waits for me somewhere. Time no longer aches, and everything I possess could fit into a single suitcase. And yet, I have never felt richer. Old age gave me the greatest gift of all, a shift in perspective. I stopped looking at what I lack and began seeing what overflows within me. Mortality is not a wall that blocks our path. It is the frame that gives meaning to the painting of our lives. Without a frame, the colors bleed, lose their shape, become nothing but a stain. With a frame of an ending, every act of kindness, every forgiveness granted, every moment of true presence becomes a masterpiece. And now, I'm speaking to you, you on the other side of this moment, perhaps carrying the weight of a difficult day, or the anxiety of a future you cannot control. My name is Elias Vance. I have seen hatred try to burn the world down. I have seen hunger try to dry out the soul. I have seen technology attempt to replace the human heart. And after a century of watching, I have only one truth to offer you before I go. Do not waste your finitude. Do not live as if you have all the time in the world. That is youth's greatest illusion. Forgive today. Love today. Be honest about what you feel today, because when the sun sets and tomorrow decides not to come, what remains of you is not what you stored in your bank account or your social media feed. What remains is the echo of your presence. It's the way you made people feel when you were with them. It's the courage you had to be real in a world built on appearances. I am ready. My suitcase is empty, but my heart is full of faces, of stories, and of a peace that only those who have faced their own shadow can know. I found the lessons hidden in my darkness, and they shine brighter than gold. Don't wait until you're 99 to begin living. Time is short, but the present is eternal, if you know how to inhabit it. If everything ended right now, what would remain of who you are today?